I want to actually sort of talk about one thing which I found. What is this? Oh, I did not know that my wallpaper looks like this. I'm like, what am I seeing on the iPad? So let me launch LinkPad. Then
just want to ask just want to ask one short question, I guess, regarding the state machine that you guys are talking about, right, for the generator. In the case of like, I guess probably I can look this up, but in the case of like a SQL query where like, you know, that's determined at runtime, right? I'm assuming it's not implemented like that for cases of like query results, right?
very good question. You are talking about Linq to SQL, and I want to talk about that, right? That's a great question. So hold on to that thought.
Fine. Yep.
In the discussion, I want to get into it because the thing that we are learning so far is what is technically called link to objects.
Right.
Okay, so you already have a bunch of objects, right? As an IEnumerable or whatever, a list or array or queue. How do you manipulate that? That's what we've been learning so far, right? Link to SQL is a little special, right? So we will get into that detail. So what I was trying to tell you guys was this, right? So let's look at this LINQ select that we wrote, right? Right. So if you say, hey, for each this, return this, right? And now you guys know as to a yield actually returns a class which implements IEnumerator, right? So when you see a select statement, it actually generates a class which represents that select statement, right? And when you write more select or where you do more query composition on the top, like I was trying to tell you here, right? See if you can visualize this for me, right? This is a class with a state machine. This returns another class with a state machine, but with some criteria, one more class and one more class on the top, right? So that's a very powerful way to visualize this as to what's really happening. If you can start seeing this as just bunch of classes with move next and current method, then lazy execution and query composition is completely obvious, right? Think of this as returning a class implementing an IEnumerator. Would you expect that class to do anything, or not even just class, an object, right? I want to actually stop sharing for 1 second and look at you and maybe actually ask about it. Did that make sense what I just said?
Yep.
When you did select, right, what you got was an object of a type that implements IEnumerable and move next method. And then it will click as to when you just write the select, it doesn't do anything. Right? Because you just have an object with move next and current method and reset method. So someone has to call the move next method. Right? I still see puzzle looks on people's faces. So I know Irene will have a hard time to follow, but what about you guys? Is it making sense what I'm saying? Like, are you able to visualize that? Todd? Yes? Mark? Avi? So sure, perfect. All right. So now we are gonna sort of quickly wrap over the rest of the interesting part, right? So we're going to talk about the var and anonymous type and all that. So I'll just try to start from scratch because what is var, why was it needed, and all that jazz, right? So imagine you have a class called person. Right? A traditional way to instant create an object of this type is you will say person p1 equal to new person. Agreed? Straightforward. Now, if you look at this, right, doesn't it seem redundant? I can't spell redundant, but it's fine. Right? Why do I have to say person p1 equal to new person? I already, on the right hand side, I wrote what the object is. So why do I have to do this here again? Right? And this is where they came up, and not this is where they came up with this to eliminate this. I'll tell you the exact use case. But in a way, if you have type inference engine, do you think it is possible for us to say var p1 equal to new person? Rather p2? Right? And what compiler will do is it will look at this expression, the right side of the expression, and it will say that is the type, so that you don't have to specify the type. Make sense?
Yep.
Now, C# guys are very conscious about spending the budget, right? And just providing this kind of syntactic sugar is actually not necessarily worth the cost, that they just let you omit this person p1, or instead of saying integer i1 equal to 10, you are able to say i2 equal to 10, right? It's not really necessarily worth the effort. Remember, var is also contextual keyword, not a reserved keyword. So you have to do a lot of work to provide this kind of syntax. So why did they do it? So the reason they did it is, so let me cover one more concept before. So if I wanted to initialize this P1 with say JD and NYC in one expression here, how would I do it? Anyone?
Object initializer.
Object initializer. Great. How many people have heard the term object initializer syntax? So let me break it down further, right? Originally, we used to do like this. Right? You write a constructor, right? And now you will be able to say JD, NYC. Now it's a one-line expression. Make sense? One second. But then you always have to write different constructor, and you have to specify that. So that's a little bit of an overload. So they said, you know what if you could do something like new person, and then you do city equal to NYC, name equal to JD. Obviously, it's not going to let us do that now, so let's add an empty constructor as well, right? Everyone has used this syntax, right? So this is what you call object initializer syntax. That is, you can initialize an object in the same expression without having a matching constructor that takes the values. Does that make sense? So what do you guys think? Is this a syntactic sugar or is it a runtime feature? Anyone?
Runtime.
What makes you say so?
I think sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just
I
saying
think
that
they must be still doing that in the background. It's just that they've, like, once it gets compiled, I'm pretty sure they're creating the constructor for us. No, it's syntactic sugar. It's not runtime. It's syntactic sugar. I changed my mind. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. It's not runtime. Sorry.
Right. Remember my first rule. There are very few things in runtimes and they are hardly changing the runtime that often. Pretty much every single thing we're gonna run, if I ask the question that is compile time feature or runtime, statistically you can say syntactic sugar and you'll be right 9 out of 10. Okay? So yes, this is a syntactic sugar. Ritesh, you were saying something?
Yeah, I was saying the same thing, that it's syntactic sugar because it would evaluate to p dot c ct equals to nyc.
Perfect. So actually, if you think about it, right, it's very simple. You know what a compiler does when you write like this? They will do like this. Person X equal to new person, X dot city equal to NYC, X dot name equal to JD. And then it will say person P2 equal to X. This is what this does. Make sense? Right, pretty straightforward. Take this curly braces and just create an object, assign it line by line, and then assign the object back to whatever they were looking for, and you're done. Right?
Wait, why would the compiler create that second object?
That's a great question. Actually, let me see if the compiler still does it. This is a long time ago memory of mine. I'm not sure if it still does it, but we can find out if the compiler still does it. I'm fairly sure it will, but we'll find out. Yes, it does that. You see this?
No, you have to remove it, right? You have to do the regular syntax and see what the compiler is doing.
Oh, sorry. My bad. Thank you. Thanks, Shishir. It still does it, thank God. Right or no? Right? And ignore the things getting like P is completely lost when you decompile it. But if you see, this line results in this, and then this object gets assigned to your actual P. Now, why does it? There is a reason, Todd. I do not remember that off the top of my head, unfortunately. I would highly recommend that you take it as an exercise. Search Eric Lippert object initializer syntax. Try to go through everything. Somewhere he has explained as to why. But I don't remember that reason. But the syntactic sugar is straightforward, right? Makes sense? And the syntactic sugar is even more interesting that you can say, hey, list integer numbers. And when you do list integer, and when you do 1, 2, 3, 4, look at what the compiler does. See this. Isn't that beautiful? So object initializer syntax is actually more involved and nuanced than you would think, right? Because in this case, it makes very intuitive sense that I'll just assign the properties. But in this case, right, they have additional logic to say that for certain collection types, if it has an add method, then you can use the syntax as well. Right? Let's try this actually. I don't know how this will get represented. So let's say I see new dictionary, integer, string, and then I'll say 1, hello. Right? So see, again, it calls the add method. So I hope that was interesting. Something I think if you have been writing C#, you've been using object initializer syntax quite a lot. But I hope you found it interesting to see how the sausage is made here. It's beautifully simple, right? Okay, so now going back to our question as to why did they add it? Why did they add what? So the reason was, they said that when you're writing some queries like this, right, sometimes you want to create an enumerable for objects based on particular properties, right? That is, you know how in select statement in SQL, you can just say, hey, select star from XYZ, but you can just say x.1 and x.2. You can just select, you can decide to project only 1 or 2 items, right? You don't have to project every single item. So they thought that that's a very good use case that we will let users select, say, 3 different attributes from 2 different types in the select, right? So then, should we force them to create a type every time they want to do it? Or should we let them, should we create a type on the fly? And if we create type on the fly, how will they initialize that object? So if you have written Linq, you would have done this. Select new, and then you just specify this, right? So this is the object initializer syntax. And they had to do it because if they didn't do this syntax, you will be forced to have a constructor, and without that, you cannot continue. Right? And when you say new, and as you know, when you say new, you have to specify a type. New person, new dictionary. But here you don't specify a type. And that's your compiler generated anonymous type. And the rule of a runtime is every type must have a name. And this type also has a name. But compiler generates it for you, and you don't know its name, and it's an anonymous type to you. So I hope the expression anonymous type makes a lot of sense now. Type is there, you don't know the name. And because, and closing the loop, if you don't know the name, how are you going to specify the type of the variable? So that's why you put the var. So I want to let that sink in a little bit. I went quite a bit in, but that is what is going on. And I see that aha on Ritesh's face, and I hope it was interesting. Ritesh?
I used to think those C# people are nice, giving us new syntax as just for syntactic sugar, but never realized it's this reason.
Anonymous type, object initializer, and var, all three were introduced strictly for Linq. Because they want to let you do projection, right? And if you want to let them do projection, if you always have to specify the type, it becomes cumbersome. Because sometimes what I want to do is write a projection and do something and return the value. And because C# is strict, everything has to have a type, then how do you work around that? How do you make Linq more easy to use? Hey, you know what? Don't worry about creating type. I will create anonymous type for you. As I like to say, it's anonymous to you. And I think it's just a beautiful term they came up with. I personally find it extremely beautiful, right? And because you don't want to force constructor, that's why you object initializer. And because it has to be a legal C# code, you have to put the var. Right? Make sense? Todd?
Yeah, no, that was great. And that was one of those moments. And I know you like when we get those. So that was really
Absolutely. If you have aha moment, please express it on your face, because I absolutely love to see those aha moments. Because when I understood that, it was aha moment for me. And I want to add that to you, Ritesh, that the reason I view it this way is I've been reading Eric Lippert's blog for a long time. And there is not a single feature in C# which is just done without a reason. Because imagine how many features can you add in the language? And how do you prioritize what to add? And just like, you know, when you are working on a team, you have a budget, right? You can't just put 100 people in and do everything you want. You have a budget, you have a 20 people team, you have a, let's say, quarterly release cycle, so you have to prioritize what are you going to deliver this quarter. So every version, they are very thoughtful about, hey, what do we do? So even though, and the beauty and genius of the team is that even though link to objects was their goal, the features are still independent, that you can use them on their own as well. Right? So object initializer is a very common feature in other languages, but they never added it to C#, in C#1 or C#2. C#3, oh, we have to do it. And now you can use it other places as well. You can stop writing constructor. If you realize, lots of people have stopped writing constructors now, right? Right? So constructor, and if you ask me, actually, I don't necessarily prefer object initializer syntax a lot. And I will go into the design of the class, why you want to have a constructor and force an initial state of the object. And that's a much deeper conversation in terms of what we want to do. So I hope var, anonymous type, and object initializer is clear to everyone. Yes? Perfect. So let's share it again. So what is the equivalent of anonymous type terminology is called nominal type. Okay. So when you write a query, you can predefine a nominal type and then populate it, or you can skip that nominal type name and let compiler create it for you. So let's actually put this in the Sharp Lab and see all the magic that the compiler does for us.
So JD, one question here. Interestingly, if we try to print out the type of this result variable, but since it's anonymous to what?
One second. Let me just compile.
Gee, I think you may have brought in an extra closing brace when you copied from your source.
Oh. Bear with me, please. Oh. Apologies for this, right? So let's look at this. Where is the class? Okay. Let's remove this code and only keep the code. I'm trying to find that, okay? Okay, here. Right, so enumerable.select, enumerable.group by on this one. And then hold on. Where is the here? Right? You see that g.key and g.count? Right? This is the anonymous type. Right? And when compiler will generate it, it will put these angle brackets in front. And because angle brackets are not legal identifier at the beginning of the name, you can never use it yourself. Right? And in fact, what they do is they also write a constructor that takes those two values and they just call the constructor. Right? So this new resulted in this anonymous type. Right? And that's why when you see that this var will get replaced by this one. So let's see if we can find it. See this? I enumerable of the anonymous type. So imagine if you had to type all this. So this is your var, basically. This var here, result, is this guy here. Make sense? Yes? All right.
I actually have a quick question about this. This may be getting off on a tangent here, but can you go back to that generated code?
Sure.
So I thought this tool, when you put in your raw C# and it generates C# results, I thought what it generated would have been something that would have been valid to use in the first place. But so I'm a little bit unclear on what this code is that's generated on the right-hand side, if it's got illegal names that begin with less than, greater than.
All right. I will tell you, and I think we went over this. All right. So C sharp, right? And if I were to have this, so let's say this is the C sharp compiler, right? It produces IL. Right? C sharp compiler does not give you translated C sharp. It takes C sharp, it produces IL. But IL is also very structured. So now you can write a decompiler to say, hey, what could be that projected C sharp will look like? So what you're seeing here is they ran the C sharp compiler to get the IL, and from then IL they went back to C sharp. And that's why you don't see that it respects your variable names. It will not say result here because it doesn't know what was it named, because variable names get lost in IL, and that's why your decompiled code looks a little bit funny because it's actually translating back from IL.
So right, but so it translates back, and I get that you'd lose whatever variable and names you happen to choose, but I didn't know what it generated back. Like, are you saying that what it gives you back decompiled is not actually legal C# code though?
Yeah, this is not legal C# code. You can't put this in anywhere. And I think, now don't quote me on that, but I think C# compiler generates this kind of code, and then they let the normal from this code to IL happen. You see, like when I talked about that object initializer syntax, right? They say, you know what, I'm gonna take C# and translate all the syntactic sugar into the core C# serverlab, and then I'm gonna let my core C# go to IL. So that's why they also simplify their lives, right? Because they need to generate a type, in fact, like in this case, anonymous type, right? Runtime doesn't have a concept of anonymous type at all. So they have to generate a type, right? So this is like a valid type name in .NET runtime. It's not a valid type name in C#. And they make it invalid so that you don't accidentally ever use it. Because you can never refer to this type. You can write a C# code here, which will be like this.
I think what's confusing is at the top they say results in C#.
And this is a C#, but this is a C# code. It's not a C# code that you can write yourself, but it is absolutely valid C# code. Just because you can write it doesn't mean that it's not a valid C# code. Right? Todd has this question mark look on his face.
Yeah, I still don't get that. Like if you couldn't write this, like if you were to go and throw this into, you know, go create a project, throw this into a file and try to compile this, what would happen? It would barf?
It will absolutely barf. You
Yeah,
cannot, like, I cannot go here and write a type like this. You can't write a type which begins with angle brackets. Let me put a class here. Right? You are not allowed to. Right? So let me put it this way, right? At the end, you do commit to certain magic by the compiler and runtime. You have to. You have to agree that they can do things that you can't do, right? So for example, when I write this public class test, right? Do we agree that
can you look at the code? Sorry to interrupt you, but can you go back to the code? Like, is there something that indicates in the decompiled code that is, okay, like something like compiler generated or something? Like, yes. Is there something that marks stuff that you couldn't actually write yourself?
No, this is just to help them out that this is compiler generated when they want to troubleshoot issues and all that, right? And the idea is that they want to mark this thing so that they can do things with it that they will not allow you to do things. They can make certain assumption for compiler generated code because they know they generated it.
But that's not a property attribute that you can use, right? Compiler generated and debugger browsable.
I don't know. I think you should be able to do compiler generated on an attribute. Attribute should be public. They might have made it. You can do it. It's an attribute like any other.
And now try to use that weird name.
No, it won't work. It won't work. It won't. Nice try. But right? It doesn't work that. You can put compiler generated, right? And you're just gonna shoot yourself in foot because that is for them to do certain additional things that they want to do on compiler generated code. It would be a terrible idea for you to use it, right? So guys, like, don't. How do I explain? I don't think we need Eric Lippert here, okay? I can't answer this question as to why is this still a valid C# and it's not valid for you. I don't think I can answer that. But I think we are trying to get across the concept, so I hope at least that makes sense. Yes? Okay. So with that, we are at the last one. So here, let me see, right? Pretty simple. Anonymous type, var, and object initializer. Good. And now we are finishing up our truly understanding Linq session. Last Linq. I'm very excited. So as I was mentioning, so far we have talked, what we use so far is called Linq to objects. But there is also something called Linq to SQL. And when you use Linq to SQL, what they do is they take the C# and they have this DB context and they turn C# into a SQL on your behalf. And then when the results came back, they assign it to object properties and it's all absolutely seamless. Are we able to visualize this? What I just said? So the query syntax, right? You write a query from XYZ into this. Do you agree that that basically gets translated into a bunch of extension methods? Right? You looked at behind the scene, it makes complete sense that the query syntax translated into a bunch of extension methods, right? But why does it have to be a bunch of extension method? You can take the query syntax from C# and translate it into a SQL, get the result, and assign it to the objects. And that's Linq to SQL. As simple as that.
I didn't get it.
Whatever the reverse, the opposite of an aha moment, I just had one of those.
All right. Let's see if I can get the aha moment. I think.
I was just gonna say, but if this is clear to everyone else, then this is something I can research on my own. I don't want to get bogged down if this is just.
Let's do this, right?
I'm with you, Todd.
All right, we have two people who think it's confusing. Let's go. Okay. Oh, no, let's not do it this way. From number in numbers where number percentage 2 equal to 0, select number. Okay, now let's agree that you fully understand how this query syntax got translated into a bunch of extension method calls. Are we absolutely clear on this? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to take this. This, we are saying, gets translated to this, right? A query syntax to a method that you all recognize and makes sense, right? So we took C# query syntax and translated to regular method calls, right? What I'm saying is, if we have some additional types in the system where you can say from P in persons, where P.city equal to NYC, select P, can I translate this thing into select star from dbo.person, where x.city equal to NYC. And then whatever I get, right, I will create objects of type P and assign the properties. That is what Linq to SQL is. And what I mean by that is, when you write a Linq to SQL query and when you do this, it is not doing that, oh, get me all the records from the person table, and then I will go one by one and find the one where the city is NYC and then filter it out for you. It translates this into a select query, right? So let's say if you said here, right, it will translate that into that I just need one value, so I'm just gonna do this select only one column. You put the where clause, so I'm gonna put the where clause. But hey, I have to do double equal to in C#, but I know the rules between C# and this one, so I will put city equal to single equal to and put NYC. I will have to put double quotes here, but when I generate my SQL, I'll put single quotes here. And that is why when you write Linq to SQL queries, there'll be a lot of restriction. It will complain when you try to use something like a complex C# expression. It will complain because it cannot translate a complex C#. Like, so for example, if this was a Linq to SQL query, you won't be able to do like where at NN P is valid. Sorry, you cannot do like is valid person P and have a method called is valid person, because it cannot write a query to translate this guy. So I still see a lot of questions like what is going on. Help me understand, where is the confusion? Because I thought this is—
Yeah, so like what would be an application of this? Like, was this like an early iteration of what Linq looked like in the first place? Because it just seems it's like a subset of the Linq to object functionality. So what would be a use case for that?
Use case for that is basically having seamless access to database in C# in the unified syntax. Then when Linq came out with Linq to objects, Linq to SQL, Linq to XML. And between three, it covers 90% of the developer use cases. Right? You are used to Dapper and you feel comfortable, right? But imagine if, and now Linq to SQL has certain deficiency, that's why it is not the choice of the world, but imagine a world where you never had to use Dapper. You just say, I want to specify my connection string, and I want to write a Linq query to access the database seamlessly. And now I have to know one syntax. One syntax, whether I'm querying XML documents, whether I'm querying database, or I have just a plain list of objects, doesn't matter. It's all unified. And that's a very laudable goal they have. And I think they succeeded fairly well. And the challenge at the end with Linq to SQL, what happened is doing an ORM is really, really hard, and it never caught on. Because as you guys all know, data models in the database are all garbage. So having as awesome as Linq to SQL is, they can't really account for all the garbage data models out there. So it's not super popular. But if we lived in a world where we had perfect data models, right? So it would just work. And that is where one of the other way, let me show you something. Let me see if LinkPad has the, yeah, let's look at this guy, right? So if you look at the LinkPad, right? So this is how it works. Right, so I have this database, right? So I'm gonna say, hey, C the company name that starts with age. Right? And now I can click on SQL. And now you see, you can write a Linq query or even the extension method query, and you can see what SQL is generated for you. And here's the beauty. It automatically parameterized it for you. And it put the age percentage, and it put the life. That is the equivalent of starts with. If this isn't beautiful, I don't know what is. Imagine this. Same INM river. But you know what, when you run it, I know Linq to SQL is play, I will start generating proper SQL statements. Otherwise, it will be a normal method calls. Right? Now here, let's try to do this, like, right? Oh my God, did it work? Yeah, exactly. Now it complain. This function is not recognized by SQL Server Compact. Right? So what they have done is written a whole bunch of code where it understands certain things like starts with. So it knows I can do a like. But you can't use each and every string function because you can't generate query on that. Right? So when I say company name, let me customer.take. Right? Can someone guess what this should translate to?
Top 100.
Bingo. How to select though, right? What is happening? Right? As I said, it's all compilers everywhere. It's all compilers. Right? Now, because I said I didn't specify a particular value, it selected all the columns. right? But if I were to say, hey, new C dot company name, C dot city, right? I just project this, right? It will create, I don't know how to do dump. Yes, how to do dump, right? See, now it will only select 2 columns. And then it will generate an anonymous type. And then it will assign this value from the select and give me a beautiful enumerable that I can look at here.
Did you have to do dump because of lazy execution?
Basically, yeah, when I just write the query, it doesn't mean anything, right? I had to run the query. So dump is basically running the query.
But then you didn't have to write dump when you were just doing a take.
But even take just says
Only after you're doing projection, you have to write dump.
Always enumerable. You have to do something with it, right? But think about how many things are happening here. It created an anonymous type for you, right? It translated this take 100 into top 100. Then it like basically converted this part into a proper valid SQL. And then all the results which came back, it created n number of objects of this anonymous type and then gave me this beautiful output. So that's what Linq to SQL is. Just more compiler magic. So I'm of the firm believer, if you can write a compiler on your own, programming will no longer remain a mystery whatsoever. Because every single thing you see everywhere, everything is a compiler. Every single thing. Because at the end, computer only understands ones and zeros, right? So somewhere from the human definition of a task, it has to go down to ones and zeros. And it's just a matter of how many layers you put in and how many compilers are there in between to get you from a human readable text into something that the computer can run. So do we have the AHA on Linq to SQL or no? Try it out on the Linq pad, write Linq to SQL and see the SQL it generates. Yes? I am not getting any convincing AHA and I'm really puzzled as to what's going on.
No, makes sense to me. I think I had the same question as Todd, which was the application, but then that's clear now.
So in Linq to SQL, there's a lot more magic going on. I am peppering over everything, right? There's a lot more magic going on because you have to specify the connection string. It has to know the schema. There's a lot going on. I just gave you a 10,000 level conceptual overview that you can write the query in C# and all it has to do is translate it into SQL. That's it. Make sense? Right. So we will now quickly share the last exercise, which is going to be very useful. It will really, it's a slightly tricky exercise, but I think it will be amazing if you solve that exercise, right? So, can we take 10 more minutes here and just go through some of the points I have written down, or people have to leave? Yeah, 10 more minutes. Good with everyone? All right. So what is the whole goal behind Linq? Right? Have you guys thought about that? Like, what is the whole goal behind Linq? So the way I see it is, at least in my mind, is how do you express your desire or your logic at a level that makes sense to you versus going into mechanics, right? So when I say even numbers, and if before Linq, you have to write for each one this, and you have to write a bunch of codes that hides the mechanics of what's going on. I mean, that shows the mechanics more than my business logic. So that we call is imperative programming. That is, you tell every step explicitly. Things like SQL and Linq helps you go into a declarative mode. That is, hey, there is a where method where you can specify a lambda expression. Don't worry, I will do the one by one iteration behind the scene for you. Because that's not the interesting part. Interesting part is that condition specified into the where clause. Make sense? And that's the whole goal of all the programming languages, to let you be higher and higher declarative concept and not let you worry about the detail. Okay? And then finally, what I want you guys to solve by next week is a method called batch. And what this method is going to do is going to take an I enumerable of t. It's going to take a batch size, and it's going to give me an I enumerable of t in the batch size. Right? So let's say I have a list of integer where I have, say, 1,000, let's say 10,000 integers. I want, and let's say my batch size was 100. I want 100 list integer, each having 100 values. Make sense? So I'll just put this up in the exercise, right? And this will be a fun way to solve this in a dynamic way, if you can think about this. This is a little non-trivial. It's not as straightforward, but it's not crazy complicated either. Okay. All right. That's it. That concludes truly understanding Linq. Finally, yay. Took a long time. Right? What I want to do is I want to send this exercise over to you guys. Let's just do Q&A more next week. I want to just make sure we go through any other questions that you might have. So if you please go finish the exercises, you might have some more questions. So let's just do a sort of Q&A next week and a prologue into what we're going to cover next. That is exception handling and system design. So that will be the next Sunday session. All right?
Cool.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Shitty.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Thanks,
Sunday and weekend. Catch you later. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.